Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. So today I am going to be making a sheath for this machete. This machete was picked up at a garage sale, so it is handcrafted. I guess someone was new dabbling in how to make blades, which is awesome. I encourage people to learn how to do that kind of stuff. It's awesome. But having a blade around that's this long and not having some kind of protection for it is not really the most ideal situation, especially when it's just kind of hanging around your house. So we're going to fix that today. So first thing that you want to do when you make your blades is consider where your blade is going to be resting on. Now normally when you see some knife sheaths and things, the leather is sewn right around the edge of that blade, but because the two pieces of the leather are going to be sandwiched like that, sometimes what happens is when you draw your blade back out, those threads that are sandwiched between those pieces of leather will get cut and pull away. So you want something that's not going to be metal that the blade's going to be resting against, because that can dull your blade. And you don't want to have just threads holding the two pieces of leather together either, because the blade can cut those. So I'm going to show you guys how you can make an insert to help protect your blades and also help protect your sheath from wear and tear and damage. So I'm going to set this blade aside. Got my water bottle. Spray your leather with warm water, or you can case it in water. The warm water tends to get into the leather a little bit quicker, and it softens it up, makes it easier to work with, especially if you are going to be doing some tooling. And I will be doing some tooling on this after I get my basic design down. This will be much easier to fold that way, and it'll work out a lot better. So it's already softened up quite a bit, but I want to make sure that it is well coated. I've got my leather all sprayed with water. It's now really easy to bend and move about, which is exactly what you want. You don't want your leather to be so soggy that it overly stretches and spreads apart too much, but you do want it to be soft enough that you can bend it and shape it. So what I ended up doing is I took my thread, my spool of thread, and just put it over the leather, and then traced it with my tracing tool and got kind of a semi-round shape that I can use and cut that out with my rotary cutter. Fold your leather over, and again, make sure that the back of your knife is to the fold. Otherwise, when you go ahead and sew it, your blade won't, cut it that way. So, got my leather folded, and I'm just gently pressing around the edges, finding where that blade is at, and I'm just getting my basic outline around that blade. And this is going to help once you sew it down. This is going to make sure that it fits around the blade properly, and then when all the water comes back out of the leather, it's going to shrink up and hold it even tighter. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and cut this, and I'm sorry, I've got birds who are just having themselves a heck of a time. You can use a utility knife if you want to. It's not absolutely necessary, but just something that's going to be sharp enough to cut your leather is going to be fine. I'm going to bring you in a little closer so you can see the scoring line, just kind of the rough scoring line that I've got on here. You can see where the back of my blade is, and then the front of the blade. One method that you can use that might help you out when you're trying to size blades, or you're trying to make a cover for just about anything, you can lay your blade down and trace your edge, flip it over, and then flip it again, and that will give you the full coverage of where your lines need to be, and maybe that'll help you out some. I'm just kind of pulling my pen right up against my blade. And this I can always buff out. But that way I can score my leather without having to leave marks in it that will be permanent. Now I'm going to go ahead and use my compass and kind of decide where at I want my border to be, because where that border is and where the edge of my blade is, I need to figure out where to put my stitching between those 2 points. And I think about a 1/2 inch will do. So I'm just going to very, very lightly go ahead and put 1 point of my mark right where my score line is. And I'm going to go ahead and mark my border edge. This is a straight punch, and you can see it is a straight punch. This is very easy to sharpen, which makes this tool excellent. And another one is a stitching wheel. Now these stitching wheels, you can get different sizes, so they'll space out the little notches, little holes in there. That'll help mark where you need your stitches to go. I'm just going to go ahead and demonstrate for you. And this will help keep your stitching really nice and straight. And this one is a punch that actually goes all the way through the leather, which is great if you are going to do any lacing work. But these are the 2 different tools that I like to use for my sewing when I go ahead and do that. This is a great tool. This one, if you have smaller threads, this one will probably be your best bet. But for lacing or doing big stitches, big projects like I've got here, this tool will work just fine for sewing your leather together. So I had originally marked this with my stitching my stitching wheel, I should say, and I decided that I'm not going to use it. I'm going to opt for this tool instead. So I'm going to go ahead and line up my first punches, mark my stitching, and I'm going to make sure that it went all the way through, and it did. Sometimes it doesn't like to do that, so if your leather tool sticks in the leather, you can always use some beeswax, and that will help it glide through the leather a little bit easier. One thing I definitely like using is some kind of a mat or wood, something that isn't really going to dull my blade that much. And again, this is easy to sharpen, and this is already set up, so all I have to do is take 1 foot, put it in the hole I've already created, and then just punch it all the way through, and that is going to mark my stitches. But having something soft, a soft material behind whatever you're trying to sew or punch through definitely makes it much easier for your tool to go all the way through the material and not just hit something and then stop when it's not gone all the way through. So you want to be able to push not through the leather but past it, so that way you get the holes going all the way through that. I hope that makes sense. Went ahead and punched all my stitching holes all the way through to the very end, so I've got both sides done. Next thing you want to do is make sure that your blade is in there really, really good, and then very, very carefully with your etching tool, go ahead and just push into the leather, and that will get you the marking holes for your opposite side. But that way everything stays nice and tight and tucked where it needs to, and that way you'll be able to match up your holes exactly where you need to, and everything will be snug. My leather strip is cut, it's punched, it's got all the holes that I need right through there. Now it's time to sew and glue this insert. into the leather. Now, one of the ways I like to fasten my needles on my thread without having to use a knot is I will take the end, there's my little tail there, and I'll take the point of my needle and just kind of push it through a few of the threads in the end. And that way it makes kind of a loop like that. And I'll just go ahead and then pull my needle through. And that way I have my needle fastened on my thread. It's not going to go anywhere, but there are no knots to pull the thread through or get hung up or anything like that in my work. So that's a really handy way of securing your needles. So I'm just going to glue that down and then tack it in place with my thread right here. And as soon as I have this process part of it done, I will come back and we'll show you what to do from there. I am so sorry, guys. My video camera battery is dying, so I'm trying to charge it here and there, and I didn't get to film how I put on my square rings, but I did get them set up, and I did 2 rows of holes there so I could do 2 rows of stitching to get those nice and secure. So those are on there, both the top and the bottom. I've got my insert done, so it is drying. So now once my blade is in the sheath, it will have that edge to protect it, but there won't be any threads for that edge to cut. So this is a really, really awesome method to help protect your blades, guys. I can't stress how important having a little insert like that is in your leather work, especially when you're working with making knife sheaths and things like that. So I put a diagonal mark, and you can kind of see it just a little bit right there. Having a basket weave set at a diagonal kind of helps to offset your eyes slightly, so if you do have any mistakes and nothing's perfectly straight, it won't be able to show. Also, another thing you want to do when you tool is go ahead and put some clear boxing tape on the back of your leather. That boxing tape is going to help keep your leather from stretching. So I am going to take my rubber mallet and stamp into my leather. And then I'm going to line that foot up, but on the opposite side. So there's my diagonal line. You can barely see it. It's going to be hidden because of the feet on the tool. So I'm going to go on the left side of the line. I'm going to go on the right side of the line. Left side of the line. Right side of the line. And the left side. And this is going to help be that center scoring for your basket weave pattern. And then all you have to do is line up the feet where there is a center spot. Skip one. And that is how you can continue your basket weave stamp. It's kind of a fun project to do. Finished the basket tooling. Now I am adding my seashell border in there. And that's going to help cover up all of these edges that were not completed all the way. This design helps to cover that up and make those edges really crisp. Adds a really nice border. Alright, so what you're going to do is you're going to land that curved side up against the edge of your border like that. I hope you guys can see this. Give it a good tap tap. And I'm just lining up corner to corner so I can get that border to go all the way around that edge. It's been a good 24 hours. My leather is completely dry. It's really solid at the moment, or I can barely bend that, which is great because you definitely want that, especially when you go ahead and start working your edges, because having it a little bit stiff makes it easier to make cuts that are going to be more flush and even versus spots that are going to pucker out like that. This is okay for right now because I still need to get everything sewn together, and I will have some excess on this side yet to cut, so having a little bit of straggliness here isn't going to be a problem for right now. But I went ahead and I've already removed some of my threads, so I'm going to start removing my tacking stitches, my running stitch here, and get sewing this with a saddle stitch. Now, the big difference with the saddle stitch when you're hand sewing versus using a sewing machine stitch is the sewing machine will loop a thread on top of thread and kind of interlock inside in between the leather, and that holds the leather together. But when you do a saddle stitch, you're having the thread loop across the leather, and that is what's going to be pulling your leather together. So it is different using a saddle stitch versus using a sewing machine, and one of the benefits to it is your project's going to last that much longer, and if you do find a little tail of a thread sticking out, you can pull it and it's not going to go come all the way out. So the saddle stitch will not do that like a sewing machine stitch will. So that's one of the benefits of hand sewing using a saddle stitch versus using a sewing machine to do that work for you. So I'm just going to go ahead. You always want to make sure you start the same. So I'm taking my first needle and going front to back, just like so. And this is only going to make one thread in the very center, but it will kind of put both needles at each end of the leather. Sometimes getting this thing started is the hardest part. I mean, once you get going, it's great, but it's the getting it started part that I don't like quite as much. So you want to match up your needles so they're together. Pull them all the way through, and here is the center of your thread, right on the inside of the leather, just like so. Okay, now that we have a needle on each side, I want to make sure I've got each needle where it's supposed to go. So this is my top needle, now that everything's all pulled through. So I'm going to start front to back. And going through my second hole there, I'm going to put that needle aside, take my back needle, and I'm going to come right back through that same hole. Now you want to make sure that you pull your threads nice and tight. This will help keep your second needle from nicking the thread as it passes through, because if you do that, it kind of makes a mess of things. Then you go back to front. Now this kind of locks everything in place once you get that first bit done. So I'm going to match up my needles again to make sure everything's where it needs to be. To go ahead and pull my work, pull it all the way through, and there we go. So I've got my center thread that I started with, and then I've got my two threads passing each other. And then once that's pulled tight, that leather just kind of pulls together. I am getting further along in my work, and my threads are starting to get a bit raggedy, so it's time for me to change threads. So I went ahead and I cut them, tied them off right there, so that way it'll keep my first set of stitching nice and tight. Now I'm going to go ahead and go back in one of these other stitches I've done. That way I'll have 3 threads going through instead of having a weak point with trying to put a knot in between my work and then having a single piece of thread going through. So I want to reinforce where I have my knots at, or where I stop sewing and then have to do something else. So front to back. And back to front. Now I have a reinforced stitch back where everything's stable already. And then I'll just go ahead and continue my work. Okay, everyone. This is where applied knowledge and failures come into play, because the only skills you have are the ones you've earned. You can gain all the knowledge you want to, but unless you apply it and have some failures along the way, you won't gain experience that will also give you your skill set. So here's where we're going to change things up. Instead of keep going to the very end and then trying to put a knot in the middle, remember, knots are going to be weak spots. And since this is going to be open and closed every time that the blade comes out of the sheath, we want no knots here. So what I'm going to do instead is take one of my needles. I think I'll just take my back needle, and I'm only going to go through the back layer and my insert. That's it. That's all I'm going to do here. And then I'm going to leave that needle hanging out. This is where, when I come back around, I'm going to tie my knot inside the seam. That way the knot won't be up here where it's going to get used the most. It'll be further down the work, and it will be supported with threads all the way around it that will help keep things nice and tight. So now this is where I'm going to do a running stitch. So I'm going to set that needle off to the side. And just do a quick and tight stitch, and my threads are getting worn out, so this will be about it. Pull it tight, come back around. Everything's real nice and snug at this point. Gonna pull that tight so everything's secured like it needs to be. Oh, I think I got a little bit of a problem in the center there. I'm going to try and pull that out if I can. Okay, that knot did not work like I wanted it to. Okay, now it's out. Sometimes the thread, when it gets worn, gets a bit raggedy and likes to try and do funky things. And I like to try and not use my thread when it gets like that. Okay, my final stitch. Now I'm going to go backwards. So all the spaces here, I'm going to go ahead and fill back in. So turn around, I'm going up my sheath, it's going right back down. And now we're back down. So I've got one space here, and I've got one space there. This is where it comes a little bit funky here. So I filled in my space on my back of my work. So now I've got one complete line. Now I'm going to fill in my space on the front of my work. Remember, we still have that needle previously tucked away. So I'm going to come in the front of my work, come out through the seam, which is always hard because again, all the edges, all the things right here are nice and tight, so it's going to support that knot and keep it in place. So there we go. Have my threads coming out the seam. Gonna go ahead and tie it off. Just a little square knot. Now I'm going to go ahead and work my needles back through that seam again and try and maybe, if I can, pull the needles out one of these holes, and then we will trim it up and seal it. Pulled the needles out, so now I need to just trim my threads, and this is a heavy weighted saddle thread. It is made of nylon. Nylon is great because you can, it won't rot and it will melt down in on itself as well, and that helps to seal those straggly little ends. So you just burn it and pat it down. Burn, melt the ends and pat it down, and you can't see where any of the knots or anything is. Everything's tucked away just like it should be. Gonna do the same thing here. Now that the leather is all completely sewn, now we need to trim up the edges, make them all clean. You can use a rotary cutter if you want to. A utility knife is fine as well. Just something that's gonna help you be able to line your blade up along that leather. And this is going to help keep everything nice and straight for the most part. Just going to lay my already pre-cut leather against my blade. And just very, very gently make your cuts. You don't want to go ahead and cut into your work because that will cut your threads, and you definitely don't want that, especially after all the work you put into it. So when I go ahead and finish up an edge, I like to just take my knife and hold it at just a very slight angle, just enough to barely catch those rough edges and just kind of smooth them out. You don't want to make your blade too much at an angle, because if there are any rough spots, it can catch your blade and then you can accidentally cut into your work. You definitely don't want that. So taking a little bit off at a time is much easier and safer to do without damaging your finished product. If you just take your blade at just a very minimal angle, just barely enough to get the job done without causing any damage to your work. Once you have your edges completely flush and flat everything's nice and smooth, you want to go ahead and bevel your edges. This makes sure that once everything's nice and cut, that you don't have a sharp edge there, especially if you're going to be wearing stuff like a belt, for instance. That sharp edge can leave sores or cut you. So having something that you can round out that sharp edge with is quite handy. I've done it with a knife, but I really like this fine edge beveler. Got a little piece of leather here where I can show you the difference, where you can see just how sharp that actually can be. But if I take that corner edge right off, you can see it rounds that out instead of having a sharp piece there. So edge beveling really is a nice handy tool to use, especially if you have any gear that you're going to be wearing. Now that we have our work nearly completely finished, now we need to add our polish to it. You can apply your dyes and things to it first before you apply your final finish, and that works really well. Now the clear coat polish is actually an acrylic, so it is water resistant. It definitely puts a shine on the leather and helps protect it from any dirt or sweat, things that might stain the leather. It also helps keep it a little bit cleaner as it has a barrier. I like to spray just a little bit of water on a sponge. Works really well and helps prevent any kind of bubbles from showing up. The bubbles can actually leave little rings and stains on your leather, so having a little bit of water to help thin it out really does produce a nicer finish on your leather work. So once this is completely done and it has completely dried, we'll go ahead and buff it, and this will be ready to go. Once your leather has completely dried, you can take a cloth, t-shirt cloth works fine, and you can rub the leather, and that will help buff everything out so it has this nice, very shiny luster to it. And this will hold up and last for many, many years. So if you like this video, you can come back for more tips and tricks later on. Bye now.